there was definitely still fears. I mean, we definitely, even in that week long hosting that we had, like we saw a lot of stuff where it's like, if these kids were gonna be in our home for long term, like we would have to come up with a game plan for X, Y, and Z. I don't know what that is. Like I don't, like I still felt over my head, but at the same time, it was super rewarding.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So we want to bring you something hopeful and helpful for your everyday life, whether you've been following Jesus for a while or you're still trying to figure out exactly what you do believe about God. Now, you'll find on this podcast things that'll help with conversations about marriage and parenting and mental health and work, practical things to help you in your faith journey, and a lot more. So whether you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app or you're watching on YouTube, be sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the hopeful and helpful conversations.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. I'm so excited to share a really amazing conversation that I got to have with Danny and Kayla Bauman about how they made the courageous decision to become foster parents. And so as we were going through our bold series, one of the things that we're talking about is really leaning into God and having a bold faith. And a big piece of that element is having bold courage. And so I wanted to talk with a couple that was really living that out in their life. And Danny and Kayla are definitely doing that. And so we talk about how they had to get over the fears of becoming foster parents and what those decisions look like, how they felt called into that. It's a really great conversation. I think it's something that anybody can gain some really helpful tips about how to have courage in their faith and courage in their life. So this is my conversation with Danny and Kayla. Hi, Danny and Kayla. Thanks for coming on the Ridge Podcast.
Hi.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
How are you guys doing today? I know you have a little one, 8 months old, right? Like, how are you guys getting some sleep yet?
On and off. Yeah. Sleep's tough. He's sleeping right now, so hopefully he sleeps through this.
Yeah. Well, I'll try not to make anything super disruptive and loud. So I'll do my best.
Danny does that all the time.
Okay. So maybe to start off, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your family situation?
Yeah, of course. As you said, we got an 8-month-old baby at home, and then we also are foster parents to a 2nd grader and a 4th grader, which has been fun. You know, we're balancing nap times and diapers with youth sports and homework and school drama. So that's our day-to-day life.
Yeah. You guys kind of, I feel like fostering, you just jump right into like a certain age before it's like, there's no like slow progression. It's just like you jump right in. So
yeah. You're like sitting in the school concerts, like trying to act natural. Like, yeah, we've been to these before.
Yeah.
all this, and all these kinds of like, all these kids. So it's fun.
So today we're talking about courage. And I think fostering is a great example of an act that takes just a lot of courage. And I'm sure there's lots of questions you have as you're going into that. But maybe we could start off. Would you mind sharing what made you guys decide to foster?
Yeah, I can start because fostering is kind of something that I really wanted. I've always felt really called towards fostering. I've always just had a heart for children and for families. And honestly, like my heart breaks for kids who don't have either reliable parents or have been separated from their parents. I know for me that family has been such a big part of my life. I lean on my family. And so I've always been just wanting to be that family for kids who don't have that. And that, started way long before I married Danny. So when I married Danny, he kind of got tied into it all. And he really did kind of embrace my heart for it and, agree that that's really cool. It's something we should do, but just one day. And, it's hard. I fall in that too. Like, oh, we'll do it one day. And, when I felt like maybe the time was right, I was like, maybe we should foster. And he's like, he kept coming up with so many reasons of why like fostering wouldn't work or it's just not convenient right now. It's just like, we're not equipped to do it. And I knew that we had to be unified as a couple on that decision because fostering is just such a big move. And it's something we both have to choose to do together. So ultimately, I just prayed that God would just open Danny's heart and, break his heart, kind of like mine had been broken for those kids. And, God really answered that prayer for me more than, he is just so on board with fostering. He's the best foster dad too. So it's awesome.
Oh, that's high praise right there. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, Danny. So then, Kayla shares with you that she has this heart to foster. She feels called to being a foster parent. What's your reaction to that? Are you like, is like kind of like a conceptually? Ooh, this kind of conceptually sounds great, but then when you think about it more, you're like, I don't know about this. What was that look like?
Yeah, no, I loved the idea of fostering, but I'm very much like logical thinker. Like we have a plan. Like this is when we get married. This is when we should try to like, I should try to get a promotion. This is when we should try to have kids, and then maybe like once we know how to parent and we have some stability, then we'll foster. And so that was kind of where I was at. And turns out like having a baby took longer than we thought, and so now it's like my plan is already like just crumbling before my eyes, and it's like, well, what are we going to do now? Do we just sit on our hands and say, well, God, like this is what I wanted, so I'll just wait till you give it to me, or do we start to take steps towards that? So actually my compromise was, well, why don't we get involved with Safe Families, which is a nonprofit that the Ridge works closely with, and really their mission is to deflect kids from foster care by supporting families and kids in like acute moments of need, not necessarily extremely long-term hostings or anything. And so that's what we started. And Kayla talks about breaking my heart for kids and the poor, and we got a call. Actually, it was kids that actually attended the school that Kayla was working at, and they were facing homelessness, which first of all just like blew my mind that someone in our community was facing that. And so she talked to some of the teachers there and was like, what's the deal on these kids? Like, could we handle them? What behaviors do we have to look out for? Like, we don't have bedrooms set up. We don't have any toys. We don't have, all these reasons why, like, we're not really the perfect home, but like, tell me more. And I just remember the teacher saying like, Kayla, I'm bringing them socks every week because they don't have shoes, and their socks are getting wrecked because their shoes got stolen at the homeless shelter. And I think your couch would feel like a castle, like a palace for them. Like we'll help you with like the details if you are willing to say yes. Like these kids could certainly use it. And to me, it was like, oh my God, like this is, what are we even talking about here? Like we don't have a room and we don't have toys, and like we could let them play my video games from when I was a kid. Hopefully that's good enough. Like this is all so far. Like no, they just need like a home to stay right now. And so that really broke my heart. And we actually stayed involved with Safe Families and had our first hosting. It went really well. It was only short term, like a week, and I was just kind of like riding the spiritual high of like, well, we can do this. Like we're definitely capable, and it was super exciting. And we started the foster application process right then, and I became a lot more open to it through kind of like this baby step of Safe Families.
So you mentioned this idea of like the logical brain, the planning it out. What were those conversations like when you're like, well, maybe the plan can look a little bit differently, or it doesn't have to look this exact way, or like how did you kind of, as you're talking through, come to that middle ground of like, no, this is a right decision, or was it truly like you didn't quite get there until you really realized the need?
There was a lot there.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I mean, I think like God kind of spoke to us through our circumstances. I think our biggest thing was, we're not equipped. Like we are not parents. And so, Danny was like, I think maybe we should just have our first kid and kind of just feel it out, like figure this thing out. We have no idea what we're doing. And so we're like, okay, I agree. Let's try for our first kid. And, years and years of trying and nothing. And it was kind of like, Danny, I think maybe God is trying to say something like, it's time to take this step. So I kind of felt like God was really speaking to us through, the inability to have kids in that moment.
Yeah. And just surrendering to that.
Yeah.
Surrendering to like, well, like how long am I going to wait before we feel called to be parents, and we knew that. So it's like, how long are we going to wait to become parents when there's clearly kids out there today that could use parents? So I think that was And that's a hard thing to give up, by the way. Like,
Yeah.
I might not be able to have kids of my own. Let's turn to for lack of a better word, option B. And that was hard. I gripped onto that for a while, but ultimately, I think we're in a better place because we were able to surrender that a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah. How did you guys process through those things? Like, was it conversations? Was it talking to a mentor? Was it seeking out resources? Like, what did it look like? Or was it just kind of a natural progression? Or was it like something you like purposefully tried to work through?
I think it was a little bit natural and a lot of conversation between the two of us.
Yeah.
Just kind of a lot of, I was trying to give a little bit of pushback on, some arguments about, why it's not time to foster. And again, like that prayer piece. I know you had been listening to some podcasts because I remember you saying like, God, well, I feel like God was speaking to me in that. But yes, I feel like it was a little bit of a progression. And then, like we said, Safe Families was perfect because I was like, Danny, this is a perfect first step. Like, let's take this little first step and, let's start there. We can take hostings whenever, it fits for our schedule. They're short term. And so we started with that. And then, it only took really one placement for Danny to be like, oh my gosh, we need to do this. It's time.
Yeah. So after that first step, were you still wrestling with those same fears, or was there new things that kind of came into play, or was it like pretty much after that point you were locked in?
There was definitely still fears. I mean, we definitely, even in that week long hosting that we had, like we saw a lot of stuff where it's like, if these kids were gonna be in our home for long term, like we would have to come up with a game plan for X, Y, and Z. I don't know what that is. Like I don't like I still felt over my head, but at the same time, it was super rewarding, like very fun, and we could do it. Like I knew we could do it, and I know Kayla was really good with kids and behaviors and all that stuff. So I'm like, I might have to lean on Kayla a little bit with some of this stuff, but as far as just like the being a dad or filling that dad role for kids, like that felt right for sure, and that was super. Like I was like, this is fun. This is awesome.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the thing with fostering is that, the fears just keep coming. You just never know what you're going to get. And even we've had the same placement for, years, and I still have fears about the future and, am I ready to handle them as they start to become teenagers? And, can we handle the sports? Can we handle the busyness? Can we handle the visits with their bio mom? And, it's just the fears are still here even after, taking that leap.
So what do you do with that fear? Is that like I guess I said it earlier, but like how do you process through that? Is it just, I'm gonna take the next step. I'm going to, shove it into a deep dark place. I don't know exactly what it looks like for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the practical of like these kids are right in front of you. You don't really have time to like worry about
Mhm.
6 years down the road. Like we're just trying to get through today.
Today.
And in the beginning, that's what it was. It was just like literally day by day. Like you wake up and like I had a little high, like another kind of emotional high, spiritual high of when we first got these kids. Probably the first month or two, things weren't perfect like at school by any means, but they were like I think just happy to be in like a safe, stable place, and we were just like we're doing it, we're living out like kind of what God called us to, and then that kind of like roller coastered straight down into just like we we are way more over our heads than we
Yeah.
ever could have imagined. I need to get through today. I need to get through tomorrow. And then maybe, I'll find an hour to try to make a game plan for like the number one burning issue. And we just started to kind of like very practically work through that. In terms of how we work through the fears spiritually long term, like those are still there. Like Kayla said, like
Hmm.
we still are dealing with those. But I think that's a totally different process in terms of just again trusting in God's promises to us that like he's called us into this. He's told us like he'll always be by our side, and we can rely on his power, his strength, and act in that faith. So that's on us. Like that's on us in the background of like our own personal battles to lean into that and be reminded of that. And whether it's worship music, reading God's word, surrounding yourself with like strong Christians that can help point you towards that
Hmm.
on a consistent basis is huge. The kids don't necessarily see any of that, but they benefit from that because then we can come into things with a little bit better perspective. Because there was definitely long stretches of time where like my head was just spinning and I was
Yeah.
just like, I think we may have made a big mistake here.
So yeah, I guess I think like I've never thought like we've made a big mistake, but I've always thought like yes, we are way in over our head. I guess for me, like the fears, they're here. They're here to stay. I honestly, and I try to push them down. Like Danny said, I live like the day to day, trying to get through it. But ultimately, I know like I have peace in knowing that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, and that we can trust God with the rest. I have a lot of peace that this is what God called us to, and I feel like if we are going to take that step and keep following God's will for us, that He's going to help us through it.
I mean, that just feels like very much like real life, right? Where the concerns you have and the far reaching future, like they don't, or maybe even tomorrow, like they don't always go away, but it's that constant, like, how do you live in the, like, even I think maybe even that, the, surviving day by day teaches the, like, okay, I just need to focus on today. I need to focus on today. 'Cause the fear isn't really going to help, right? Like, but I think that's very real to like not have it magically disappear because you're trusting God. It's I'm trusting God and He gives the peace to go through it. I see that as a sign in the back of your room. I trust the next chapter because I know the author. So that's good. That's very, very applicable here.
What we live by. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I imagine, and one of the things that I think is probably for anybody, one of the obstacles to doing something that I think that maybe they have hesitations about, they have fear about, but they're feeling like God's calling them to, is that idea that life won't be quite as comfortable as it is like currently. Was that something that you guys talked about or had to wrestle through?
Yes. I mean, it's just how we were literally, in a kidless stage of life. We had literally just traveled for, 8 months and we had our house to ourselves. Our house was clean, everything was on our own time. We were hanging out with friends whenever we wanted. It was just, we were living a very, very comfortable life. And, we knew that when we stepped into fostering that we'd be giving a lot of that up, but I don't even think we realized like the gravity of, what bringing kids into your home really entails. And I mean, especially foster kids too, when there's just so many appointments and social worker visits and, visits with, their parents and therapy and just, endless things. And so I guess, we underestimated probably how much we'd be giving up, but it's all been good.
Yeah, that part for me was easier to wrap my head around. I think like we're okay with that level of sacrifice. The parts that scare us is just the stuff that we'll never like fully feel comfortable with, and there'll always be fears of just like these worst case scenario things happening, or some of these cycles of trauma like repeating themselves in our homes or communities. And so like the comfort thing was real, but I think we quickly realized like, oh, that's like the least of our concerns. Like Netflix can wait, that's fine. Like we haven't engaged in any of that in like 2 years straight now, where it's just like what's going on in the entertainment world, like who knows? But we have a much better grasp on kind of our family and our life, and so now we can feel like we can start to rebuild a little bit of our social life, for lack of a better word, which has been great. And we're lucky. Our support system has been extremely accepting of our kids and our family, and we don't feel like we're excluded anywhere. Like anything that we're excluded from, like we would have said no to anyways, just because I've got a strict bedtime. But it's been a process for sure of like digesting all the life changes.
Mm-hmm.
So was there like a moment where you just kind of have to, I don't know, accept it or embrace it? As far as like an uncomfortability standpoint, is it just like, okay, you have to just accept what it is because you want something greater? Or like, was that the thing that like helped? I guess, Danny, you're kind of saying that like it was helpful to have something that was like more important essentially than the comfort.
Yeah, I think when you're living, like, I feel like we were living in God's purpose and still are. And that is such a bigger joy than like being able to watch, whatever TV show I want to watch after
Mm.
work, or being able to, go get drinks with friends or whatever. Like that is definitely a way deeper, more profound like enjoyment. Like I genuinely go to bed happy at night when we have good days, and it was like I think like we saw growth in the kids, and
Hmm.
like who cares if I didn't do it? Like that stuff is so small, like that they're just like small creature comforts that when you really feel like you're doing what you should be doing, everything in life just like gets a little extra gloss to it, I think. And that's way better. Like I would give up all that other stuff for sure. And I haven't given up. Like I still have like one hobby I do every morning that Kayla's nice enough to let me go do. So it's like it's not like I don't do anything for myself. It's just that things are reworked so that they work around like we know we have to do things for ourselves when the kids are sleeping, basically. So we're up early in the morning, or we're up a little bit later to squeeze those things in, and that's totally fine. Like that works in the rhythm of our life.
Yeah.
Mm. So, this may be a tricky question. I don't know if I've ever asked it of somebody before. You guys are living out what God has called you to do, and just embracing that and making that happen. And you kind of touched on it, Danny. But what does that feel like? Like how does that bring that peace and that joy?
Well, I won't gloss past the fact that I earlier said it was a roller coaster. So like just first of all, there were some bad times, but I think falling back on like that promise of like yes, like we're doing exactly what we should be doing. We feel very confident in that. We feel very confident that God called us to be parents, and God gave us a biological son of our own now too, which is like just a blessing beyond all blessings compared to where we were. And so I think that there's like not just because we were able to get pregnant, but there's a real light and hope in like the feeling you get when you put in, and people probably get this in their day jobs. I personally don't right now, but you just put in a good day's work and you see the growth and you see the progress and you just feel like, yeah, that's like that day actually didn't feel like work. Like I actually felt like I was equipped to do that, and we did it, and I think we did it really well. And this is really, really cool, especially when we still look back like 2 years ago when we first got these kids compared to now. It's like just night and day the growth that they've shown, and it's not all us for sure. I think a lot of it's God, frankly, just working in their lives, and
Hmm.
the Ridge has been a big part of that.
Hmm.
They've just shown so much growth in so many areas of their lives where you just have to look back and be like, yeah, how could I ever regret this? Like, this
Hmm.
has been incredible.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think we've touched on plenty that our life is definitely not, easy, as easy as it was. It's definitely gotten a lot harder, and the day to day is really hard. But I think for me, like the decision has just impacted me and my faith, like in every way possible. All the decisions we've had to make that, took a lot of courage and, were just really bold moves, took, a lot of desperate prayers, and wrestling with God. And because of that, I feel like I'm closer to God than I have ever been. Um, I feel like when we're comfortable, at least for me, I feel like when I'm comfortable, I don't feel that close to God. Like I'm just living my day to day. God's just there when I need him. But when I put myself in a situation where I need God, I just feel like, I'm surrendering to him, I'm trusting him, and I'm telling him, like, I'm doing this thing that you want me to do, and I will absolutely do it. But God, I need you, and I cannot do this by myself. Um, and so I think my faith has grown a lot. I am like so much closer with God, and I have just like this immense, peace that I am where I'm supposed to be right now. I'm sure there's, more in life than what we're doing right now, and God's calling us to bigger things eventually. But, I think right now I'm really, at least out of like what I feel like is my comfort zone. And that, makes me rely on God a lot more.
Mm. It sounds like more than anything throughout the whole process, it was like a continual, like instead of like pulling back and be like, oh, it's so hard, and like kind of withdrawing from your relationship with Jesus, it was like, no, I'm gonna lean in more, and actually like do what I've always like head knowledge known of, like, oh, I should rely on God, and then it's actually like, no, in that moment where it's crazy and maybe the kids are having a meltdown or something like that. It's like, no, I'm going to actually lean in and rely on God in these moments. And seeing that kind of showcase in how your faith grows. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we went for weeks at a time of just like begging God for change, for movement, for hope, and then it's just this cycle of like you're just begging God for like small little bits of improvement, like please just like no fights today, no fights today.
Yeah.
That's cool. Like I don't want to talk to the principal today, and
Yeah.
then it's just like this praise of like, wait, we made it a week and I have not heard from the principal, and then it's just begging like, okay, that's baseline now, like hopefully, and it never is, like it always goes up and down, but it's just constantly just begging God for something different, and then seeing that growth when you look back is just like, man, God was there. He has been faithful. He has been moving, and yeah, things aren't going to be like magically perfect by any means, and there's still fears, there's still concerns, there's still growth for all of us, but we really felt like, what other choice do we have? Like we just like we have to have God step in here.
That's so powerful, because I think it illustrates that it wasn't like one prayer, one moment of just like, oh God, could you do this? And snap your fingers and it happened. And it's like, okay, well, great. Now it's sunshine and rainbows. But really that continual journey and those moments of, and like you mentioned, weeks at a time of praying for movement and growth. And I'm sure there was lots of frustrations in those moments and really wanting God to show up, and probably even, I don't want to speak for you, but like, God, why aren't you acting on this yet? There's a lot to wrestle through, and the fact that you guys did the wrestling, I think showcases in how your faith has grown and how God has kind of blessed that.
Yeah, I definitely see that blessing in the kids and in us. And I think anytime you stretch your faith and like you're out of your comfort zone, we're way over our heads. And then, like I said, all of a sudden I feel like we're not over our heads. It's like, well, what changed? Like, well, we grew somewhere, we grew somehow, the kids grew. And so I think, we can hopefully just keep leaning on God, and he can keep just growing us and stretching us through that, where, I think already today, obviously, if we took another placement tomorrow, we'd just be so much more equipped as parents. And if these kids go home, I think we feel really comfortable with the foundation that they have now, with, some time with us and some time praying to God, getting to know God. And they'd never been to church before coming with us. And now our foster son prayed for our family last night. And that's really cool. Like, it's cool to see that.
Yeah, that's awesome. What advice would you give somebody who maybe they're feeling called by God to do something? Maybe it is fostering, or maybe it's something else, or maybe it's a career change, maybe it's a big step, maybe it's stepping into something that's uncomfortable, and they're just they're feeling called, and they're trying to pick up the courage to do that. What advice would you have?
First,
Yeah, sure. I have a few things. I guess first, it's been big for me is just rely on prayer. Don't be shy with God. Tell him why you're struggling, tell him maybe why you want to do this thing or you don't want to do this thing. Ask for his plan to be revealed to you. Just be specific with him. Don't be afraid to talk to him, and also give him, space to speak back to you, that be through, prayer, through people, through your circumstances. Just be on the lookout for God, speaking to you. And then also just know that God wants you to live outside your comfort zone. Like, he didn't create us to live this comfortable life. Like, he calls us to so much more than that. So, I don't know, if something feels challenging and you're not sure if you can do it alone, I think that's where you should be. You should be giving God that space to work, and it's good for you to just, trust in him. But yeah, and I think lastly, like it's going to feel hard to make whatever decision you're making, and it's going to continue to feel hard. Like we had said, this has been an ongoing, like we are wrestling and, asking God for help all the time. But, with every, hard decision, at least for me, I have felt like so much peace about making that decision. So I think like if you make a decision and you just feel kind of this like pushback, like, I just don't know if that's the right decision, it might not be. I know for me, once I did like make that hard decision, I was like, this is hard and this kind of sucks, but I feel peace about it. And I know God's with me, in it. So.
Yeah, I'd say following up on that, like Kayla says, like you're relying on prayer, and part of that is just like confirming the calling that you feel called to. I think that was obviously the big thing for me, and what I was wrestling with is like we're called to this, I think, but I'm not sure about the timing, and there's a lot there in terms of like is this actually what I'm supposed to be doing, and you want to make sure you get that right. So between prayer and obviously reading your Bible and trying to hear from God that way, talking to trusted friends and Christian friends, and seeing if they see this calling in your life potentially as well, is important. I think a small asterisk to that is not everyone that you, I guess, socialize or verbalize your calling to is going to be supportive. We've got a really great support system, but even still, there's people close to us that were like, for lack of a better word, you guys are crazy. Like, what are you thinking?
Well,
You've got a nice life. Like,
they're looking out for us.
because and it's a love, right? Like, they just don't want to see us get hurt or bad things happen to us. And a lot of times when you're doing something courageous or bold, like there's fear there, and rightfully so, because there are potential bad outcomes. And I think just as long as you understand that just because someone comes to you with like concerns, like you probably share those concerns. Like I shared all those concerns that were shared with us, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But it does mean that you should really make sure that that you are called to that, and that you're prepared for those downsides, and that you have exit plans and all that. And of course, the flip side of that is if someone comes to you with one of their bold plans, like you want to be the person, hopefully, that can cheer them on and be that Aaron to the Moses, so to speak, or like a Barnabas to the Paul, where it's like, what, we maybe see some concerns, but there's no reason why we shouldn't push through this, right? And so I think that's something that probably I have to get better at, even as a dad, where it's like, the kids are getting older and they want to start doing more things, and how can I be like, what, that's a little crazy, but you can do it, and I'll be there to support you, instead of a lot of times it feels like we're just kind of default no, like let's just we got it all right here. So that's kind of the first part, I think, is like confirm your calling and obviously pray about it. And then there's also just the saying that I think is super true, and was true for us, is God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so if you're called to it, like he will qualify you, he will help bridge those gaps, and you can work in his strength and rely on his promises to you. And so I think we've seen that through the Bible as well, of like, if you're called to something, God's going to like miraculously find a way, one way or another. Mm-hmm. So, and then I think the last thing for me is just like, if you can find a way to take that baby step, like for me, it was the Safe Families experience. Is there just one step, or even like what you might consider a half step, that you can take? And God, like you might not be able to see step 10 from where you're standing, but once you're on step 1, all of a sudden, like you see step 2, and you're like, well, then I'm just going to go to step 2. And then you're on step 2 and you're like, but I'm over my head again, but I do see step 3. And then next thing you know, you're a couple steps down the line and you're like, how did I get this far? It's like, well, I just took that one step in faith, knowing that if it didn't work out, hopefully I can jump right back. But if it does, and if I can push through that, I can accomplish something that I never would have thought possible. So just, focus on that next step, rely on that support system to get you through those tough steps. And I think it's been huge for us.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that was so good. I had questions like would pop into my mind, and then you'd like jump in and just like answer them and dive into them. And that's really impactful. I think that's a great, man, that's just so like such well condensed, helpful advice that feels very practical and very authentic. So thank you both for sharing that. Thank you for sharing on the topic of, I know it's there's a lot to fostering. So one, thank you for being parents that are helping these kids and raising them and helping their faith. That's just so awesome. And thank you for following God's call in your life. That's what a great example. And just encouragement to, I think, everybody listening, to myself, of how God blesses and really shows up when we live into what he's called us to. So thank you both for sharing and joining for the podcast.
Yeah.
course.
Thanks for having us. Hopefully
Yeah.
it's helpful to someone to take their next step and live a little more boldly. We're really excited about what the church is going through as well, and hopefully we can play a part in that.
Hmm.
Well, that was my conversation with Danny and Kayla, and I just want to thank them again for sharing so many helpful and impactful things in their journey, in their faith story. And a couple things I really wanted to highlight. One, if you're feeling called into doing something by God, I loved their description of how it's not necessarily going to be perfect. It's going to be a struggle, and at times is hard, but God is going to grow your faith and your life and grow you in the midst of that. And what an amazing picture of what a life of walking with God looks like, where we don't necessarily always have comfort, but we do have the things that we need. He gives us the strength to go through it. And on the other side, we have a peace and a joy in our lives that really is not possible without walking with God and without doing the things that God has called us to. And ultimately, when God calls us into something, he is doing it for a reason. And when we do it, it impacts our life so tremendously. And so I just want to encourage you, if that's something that you're wrestling with right now, you have something that God is calling you to, as we're going into a bold season where God may be calling you to participate in bold. I want to encourage you to follow what they were sharing about praying and considering and relying on God, and being okay if there's some moments where you have to face some things that make your life a little bit less comfortable, because that's what God is calling you into. So that's my encouragement for you for this week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast, and make sure to follow and subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.